All right, welcome to another Pat Dooley show. We got a great panel lined up for you, and of course we'll have the list a little bit later. But certainly we want to start out talking about Florida's win over South Carolina. As Robbie wrote, it defies logic how they won that game. Not only how they won the game, but how they won it 44-11. But there's no question that this Florida team is just they're on a mission, and they're going to find a way to win these games. So it was fascinating to be sitting there at halftime. 21-6 Florida, and yet they were sitting there with 29 yards of offense. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but turnovers. And, you know, the difference in turnovers, I think they were minus 15 or minus 14 last year and plus 11 this year. You think about 25 different turnovers, 25 more turnovers. You can, no matter how you want to look at it, a plus 25 basically from last year. That's how you go 7-6. That's how you go 7-0. Because turnovers are a huge part of the game. But obviously Florida's kicking game has been tremendous. And the other thing that's been amazing the last 2 weeks, the special teams coming up with big plays. Obviously the 2 fumble recoveries. You had DeBose with another nice kickoff return. Special teams were good in the first 5 games, but it was all kicking. It was just the kicker. And one thing they've got to clean up, though, is those extra points. I noticed early on an extra point, and if you remember, they had one they had a field goal blocked early in the year. I've noticed a couple of times gaps opening up and guys getting through, and sometimes they're not blocked. This time a block kick cost them 2 points. Didn't matter, could have. They got to clean that up. But special teams coming through, and of course this defense playing very well. I've told this story that Wednesday of last week, Steve Spurrier called me out of the blue and said, I can't get my quarterback to throw the ball. And if he doesn't start throwing it, I've told him I'm going to pull you. So at halftime, he pulled him, and I was like, I think I was the only person in the press box that wasn't surprised. It was almost a surrender move because they weren't going to win with Dylan Thompson, but they still went out there and had to try to do whatever they could do. But you took the running threat away. That was pretty much it for South Carolina. So Florida gets another big win against a top 10 team, and still not getting. I really feel like Florida's still not getting a ton of love. They're getting it in the polls. They're obviously in the computers love them. But even their own fans are going, are we really that good? And you are what you are. Your wins are what they are. I sense in the national media they're starting to go, hey, we may have missed this earlier, but Florida might be pretty good. Because if you looked at these guys that do these projected bowl things, which is a little bit ridiculous. It's like people who have Heisman watch lists 3 games into the season, but they do these projected bowl things. Nobody ever had Florida in a BCS Bowl until this week. Finally, they're starting to say, well, they're not going to beat Alabama, but maybe we'll put them in the Sugar Bowl. But again, I was talking to my wife about this the other night. We were projecting where they might go. We're thinking, hey, what if they go here? What are we going to do with Kelsey if they go to the Sugar Bowl? Can we take her? We got to just wait and see what happens. You got to let the season come to you. Obviously, this sets up a huge game on Saturday with Georgia. It's always big. This is what I wrote about Thursday. The game is always big. It wouldn't matter if they were both 0-7 because it's Florida, Georgia. It's 50-50 crowd. It's in Jacksonville. It has a special feel to it. It's unlike any feel you have for any other game. I mean, look, I've been to Knoxville and Baton Rouge and Tuscaloosa when the game was huge, but it was almost like the game was huge because the game was huge. Here, the Florida-Georgia game is always huge, no matter what's going on. This is only the 3rd time in the last 25 years they've both been ranked in the top 12, but it's always been a huge game. Somebody's always seems to be going well. If the other team isn't, then it's a chance to upset them. But there's no question this one's big. If Florida wins, they win the East. It's over. And they continue this improbable march to a possible national championship game. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they have a chance. So we'll see if they can get this win. And, of course, if Georgia wins, all they've got to do is beat Ole Miss and Auburn. Now, Ole Miss is better, but really, I don't think if Florida's hoping, well, if we lose to Georgia, Georgia will lose one of those 2 games, I wouldn't count on it. Auburn obviously is a huge mess. So it's a big game, but one thing, and this is what I wrote about, Florida's got this motto that Jeff Dillman gave them, Florida never breaks. Well, their motto this week should be Florida always answers, because since 1990, when Florida's dominated the series, every time Georgia wins, Florida has an answer the next year. This is Will Muschamp's opportunity to offer up that answer, and we'll see if he can do it. So we'll see what happens on Saturday. Looking forward to it again. I'm going up Friday for Danny Werfel's golf tournament for Desire Street. Look forward to seeing Danny. Herschel Walker's going to be there. Lindsey Scott, some names that that caused some issues for Gator fans, but a lot of Gators as well. Look forward to being up there for that. It's a great weekend, and you've got to make a weekend of it. It's not to me one of those, drive up the day of the game, drive back. You got to go up there and make a weekend of it. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, it's time right now where I look at 3 things. I almost put 2 fingers up. 3 things. All right, it's time for 3 things. We're going to look at 3 things I'm thinking this week. Number 1, see you later, Geno Smith. And I have nothing against Geno Smith, but the last 2 weeks, you went from a Heisman runaway winner to not even on anybody's ballot. It's amazing how that can happen, but the last 2 weeks, he hasn't been very good. His team hasn't been very good. They've gotten blown out. That hasn't helped. But look, that's the way it is with the Heisman. You know, you can be a front runner one day and not even get an invitation to New York the next. I think he can still get to New York. I don't think he can win it. I really don't. Unless there's a colossal, for example, Colin Klein has a rough game this week. If he goes out and is terrible, he's right now the leader. You know, I have A.J. McCarron on my ballot, but, he's still got games, obviously, against Mississippi State and LSU the next 2 weeks, and then A&M. Te'o, I don't think a defensive guy is going to win it, but I think he's going to New York. But so Smith can still move up, but I just don't see him blowing by everybody, especially because those 2 games are going to stick with people. And, it's a shame because you're a really good quarterback, but last week he even threw interceptions, which he hadn't been doing. And number 2, I can't help but wonder if the end is nearer for Steve Spurrier as a head coach than I thought it would have been, say, last summer. Last summer, I approached him with the idea that he could still catch Bear Bryant for SEC wins. And he said, no, I'm not going to coach that long. And I started thinking, you'd have to win 7 games for 7 years. But when you get closer to it, you might want to think you're leaving at 5, but when you get closer, you're going to want to stick around. But, there's got to be a point when he just goes, it's just not going to happen here. We can win the SEC East every once in a while, but we're not going to win a national title because it's just not there for him. This week, the last 2 weeks, I think is going to discourage him a lot. We'll see. I mean, I'm sure he'll bounce back from it, but you got to wonder if maybe a year or so down the road, he just says, I'm going to the beach. I didn't think it was, there was a very cocky, confident Steve Spurrier this summer and through the early part of this year. That was a very beaten down man after that game. And he looked it, he talked it, he acted it, and he may just be frustrated to heck with that team, and we'll see. Well, I mean, again, I'm not trying to run him out. I love it. I wish he'd stay around forever because he's fun to talk to. And number 3, the BCS, we only have it for another 2 years, well, this year and next year, but it's still a mess. Oregon, did you watch that game Thursday night? I did. I watched the first half, and then I went to bed. 43-7 over a good Arizona State team. The great atmosphere, everybody's fired up. They drop in the BCS polls because they called off the Dogs in the second half. Well, that's not what this is supposed to be doing. I know Kansas State had a big win; they moved ahead, but I also know that it doesn't matter till the end. But this is another example where the BCS the computers are a mess. I know the computers love Florida this year, so everybody loves the computers. You may not love them next year or the year after that. Can't wait for it to be over with. I know I talked about it last week, but I'm back talking about it again. All right, it's time for our panel. Neal Anderson, the former great Gator running back, joins us, as well as Andy Staples from SI.com. All right, welcome back to the Pat Dooley Show. What a great panel we have for you today. We've got one of the greatest running backs in the history of Florida football, Neal Anderson, joining us, and one of the greatest offensive line. Well,
I'm the worst walk-on in the history of the program. Just remember this.
Really? The worst?
Yes, absolutely the worst.
Well, one of the best writers for SI.com. You know him well. Andy Staples does a great job over there. Must read, especially during the weeks leading up to the games. I really enjoy it. Steal some ideas from him sometimes.
Yeah, they're free. I stole enough from you over the years.
All right, so we got 5 questions for our panel, and we'll do this. First of all, though, Neal, it's got to be kind of fun to watch this team. It reminds me a little bit of those Charlie Pell teams.
Hey, I feel the same way at home watching it. When you see them running the ball, you know it's going left to right, but you know they're going to run it. And you see teams not passing for a lot of yards, and it reminds me of the good old days.
Well, let's get to that first question then. Can Florida win? This would be its 4th straight game passing for less than 100 yards. The last 3, of course, they won passing for less than 100 yards. I'll start with you, Andy. Can they win this game against Georgia, but with passing for less than 100 yards?
Yeah, they can. I mean, it's similar to a situation in South Carolina. You've got a very good pass rusher. Jadeveon Clowney and Jarvis Jones, very different kind of guys,
Right.
but both of them are really good at getting to the quarterback. They're going to be disruptive in the passing game. If you can run it, why bother throwing? What's the point? You're just inviting mistakes. You know, against LSU, against South Carolina, Florida proved they could run effectively, and by the second half, they were wearing the team down. Now, against South Carolina, they threw it a little better. You know, those numbers are down because those drives were short. They were getting the ball in plus territory. But when they needed passing, they had it. They had the 2 touchdown passes from Driscoll in the red zone were very good plays. You know, he had another 3rd and long in the middle of the field that he converted. They can throw when they need to, but they're not taking risks that they don't need to take.
Well, and that's what they've been, Neal. I mean, they've been a team that's trying to avoid the turnover issue and not throwing the ball a ton, throwing it effectively when they need to throw it. But I'd love to go look up the last time Florida won 3 in a row with less than 100 yards passing in every game.
Well, I mean, they got the right mix. They're playing great defense, and when you can play defense the way they've been playing it, and especially forcing turnovers, you can win without having to throw the ball so much. But I think it's tough to rely on that formula week after week, especially when you're playing a team that might have a little more offense as far as passing the ball and force you to score more points.
And that's, I think, one of the concerns for Florida this week is Georgia's going to score some points. I mean, they're pretty good offensively. Of course, they also scored 7 against South Carolina.
Well, but Florida is going to score some points, too. It's not like Georgia has been playing defense like South Carolina or LSU was.
Right.
You know, Georgia's given up a ton of points to Tennessee, way more than Florida did. They gave up a ton of points to South Carolina. They gave up 24 points to Kentucky, which, you know,
They go 0 against Florida.
you know, adjust for Kentucky, and that's like 50.
Right.
So, you know, Georgia's defense has not been what it was supposed to be. Now, Sean Williams, their safety, went off
I saw that.
and said, you know, they're not playing the right guys. It's interesting because it's one thing to say your teammates are playing soft and speak very generally in a public forum like that. That's fine. He called out specific players. He says he didn't, but when you say, this guy needs to play, you're calling out the guys who are playing instead of that guy. So it'll be interesting to see chemistry-wise how those guys are doing come Saturday.
Yeah, and again, that's a big part of what's Florida's success is the chemistry. I'm a big believer that the second half of Texas A&M is when this team came together as a team. So we'll see where it goes from there. The number 2 question today, ESPN has, this was in Gene Wojciechowski's column, I almost call him Joan Wojciechowski. Chris Felica, their stat guy, says the Gators' chance of playing in the national championship game is 9.6%. So you're saying there's a chance. But Neal, I mean, would you think it's better than that or worse than that?
I don't think it's any better than that. I can't see them stacking up their will against Alabama. I mean, Alabama just looks so dominant, but, you know, it's one game.
Right.
And any time you play in one game, anything can happen. I mean, you see what happened against South Carolina last week. I mean, they couldn't even get the handoff and get a run. I mean, they just turnover after turnover, so things could go their way. But I think Alabama is just a little too strong this year.
The interesting thing about Alabama, you can make this argument that Florida should be number 1 ahead of Alabama, based not on eyeball test, based on resume.
On resume, absolutely. You can make it now, and it doesn't really matter because they're eventually going to have to play each other.
They got to play each other eventually.
Yeah, you can make, but you know, Arkansas was supposed to be great when Alabama played.
Yeah.
And you know,
That hasn't worked out.
yeah, it didn't work out too well.
Yeah, I believe Alabama's next 3 opponents are 17-1
Yep.
combined.
No,
so-
2, because Texas A&M lost 1 of them.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So, 17-3 actually.
Yeah.
So Texas A&M lost 2 and LSU's lost 1.
Right.
But you know, we'll see what they're made of in the next 3 weeks. But I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be very similar to what we saw the last 8 weeks. You know, that team is just phenomenal. And so I would probably put Florida's chances at less than 9.5% because if Alabama's in the way.
Yep.
Yeah, Alabama was, you know, history was play great defense and run the ball. Now they can throw the ball when they want to, not just because they
Which
had
they
to.
did against LSU a little bit in the championship game.
And that makes it tough when now you can run, you can pass, and you have a great defense. I mean, multi-dimensional.
Right. And what I like about Alabama is they throw when you don't think they're going to throw.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, John Parker Wilson, Greg McElroy were good quarterbacks. They were good game managers. They didn't make a ton of mistakes. A.J. McCarron's a really good quarterback. He's one of those guys that if he were playing in another program, he'd be putting up monster numbers.
Right.
Exactly.
We were joking the other day that he'll have to go to the NFL to actually get unleashed. But he's very, very good.
All right, number 3 question. Start with you, Andy. Bubble more likely to burst? It seems like an obvious question, but I'm asking it anyway. Notre Dame or Mississippi State?
I think Mississippi State is most likely to burst. I can definitely see them both losing this weekend, but Notre Dame, I think, can match up somewhat against Oklahoma. We just don't know because Notre Dame hasn't played a team that spreads you out
Right.
the way Oklahoma does. But Notre Dame's front seven is awesome. This is not just, the media pumping up Notre Dame. And no, their front seven is really, really good. We don't know how good their secondary is, though.
Yep.
And you got to be able to cover man-to-man to play those teams that spread you out. The thing Notre Dame has that I'm really interested in against Oklahoma is Stephon Tuitt. He's a 6'6", 300-pound, 3-4 defensive end. You can't get to Landry Jones. You're not going to sack him. He catches the ball, he throws the ball.
Right.
So, but if you have a 6'6" guy with this massive
Bat it away,
wingspan, you
yeah.
might be able to bat some down because you've got to disrupt them and get them out of sync. And I can see Notre Dame doing that and then maybe making them make some mistakes. Mississippi State, it's hard to see them beating Alabama, even though they have great corners who can cover man-to-man. They don't have the pass rushers they had in past years. If you could take the defensive line they had in 2010 when they had Fletcher Cox and Pernell McPhee, and then add them to the now senior Jonathan Banks and corner and all that, I'd like to see that team play against Alabama. But I just don't know that they have enough dynamic pass rushers to do much to disrupt what Alabama wants to do.
Neal, I had a line in one of my blogs. I said Mississippi State hasn't beaten anybody, but they've beaten everybody. I mean, they haven't beaten anybody, but they've beaten everybody they've had to play.
Yeah.
They're about to get the meat of their schedule, but I still don't think we are sure how good they are.
No, but I think they can't compare to Alabama. But I think they can only play who's on the schedule.
Right.
So they've done well. But I think it will be a tie as far as who's bubble first because I can't see Notre Dame putting up any points. And you got
That's their problem, yeah.
And so I can't see them putting up any points.
They play bad offense against no matter how good the defense. They're playing.
What they need is a game like Florida had against South Carolina where the defense
Turns
gets them
it
some
over.
turnovers,
Right.
or maybe they have a nice special teams play. That's their best shot.
And I think they're gonna need to score some points this time. So I think both bubbles are gonna burst. Exactly.
All right, number 4, Florida, Georgia. We know how big a game it is around here, but nationally, Neal, we'll start with you. Do you think that people look at Florida, Georgia as one of the top 5 rivalries in college football?
I don't think so anymore, not nationally. I think because of the teams haven't, in the last couple of years, haven't been that great,
Right.
as dominant as they were in the past. And I think, just nationally, the heat of the rivalry isn't the same as it used to be. So I think it's lost a little.
Because of Florida's dominance,
I think
really
so.
over the last,
you gotta have, it needs to go some back and forth to
Yeah.
be a real rivalry. And you can talk a little trash, but Georgia hadn't been able to say very much.
They haven't won 2 in a row since 1989.
I blame Stephen Orr Spurrier and Urban Meyer for that. Florida, Tennessee eclipsed it in the 90s because Florida was killing Georgia, and Florida and Tennessee were playing for titles. And then Florida State obviously eclipsed it because all those games were so high stakes for so long. Now it would be Florida LSU,
Right.
in terms of stakes when the teams play. And Georgia's got to win some more to make it a rival. Now, if Georgia wins this year, I mean, that's a
2 in a row.
heartbreaker for Florida.
Yep.
That's the kind of game that gets it back to being a big, blood-boiling rivalry.
You didn't have a lot of success in that rivalry, did you?
I had a little
You
bit.
had- you had the one.
I had a little bit, but
No, I'm not saying you personally. your team.
Right, the teams, but and then it was big.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that game was as big as they could get. Even I think nationally it was much bigger than it is now.
What was it like going? We always hear going over the bridge. When you ride over that bridge, you look down, you see all those people and everything. Is that?
It was great. I mean, the height that was surrounding that game, especially when you cross the bridge, it's just like this is it. And it was like you knew it's getting ready to come up now. This is getting started. And I mean, the adrenaline, if it wasn't already overflowing, it started at that point.
Right. Yeah. There used to be. It's not the way it is now. There used to be a smell about that game. I was telling Buck Lewis on the podcast radio show. It smelled like pulp mill, coffee, cheap bourbon, cigars, all mixed together. All right, last question. As far as the Florida-Georgia game goes, big game obviously, but a big game for the coaches. Start with you, Andy. Bigger game for Mark Richt or Will Muschamp?
Bigger game for Mark Richt. Will Muschamp's already overachieved this year. I don't think anybody expected Florida to be where they are right now.
You didn't have them 7-0?
Yeah, believe it or not, no. But no, I think Muschamp's ahead of schedule with what he was planning to do. Everything he said when he got hired, when he had that introductory press conference, is coming true.
Right.
So obviously people are happy with him. They think he's on the same track. They'd love for an SEC East title, but I don't think anybody'd be disappointed with a 9, 10 win, 11 win type season. For Mark Richt, it's a different story. They had all those guys on defense come back that could have gone pro. They just don't seem to achieve up to their talent level, and it drives those people crazy. Just drives them nuts. Now, I'm not saying they should fire Mark Richt because the guy wins a ton of games, and eventually you're going to break through the way he recruits, the way he coaches. But it's going to continue to drive the Georgia people nuts if they lose this game.
And the other thing, Neal, is he's I think 3-9 against Florida, but the 3 wins have always been followed by a loss. He hasn't been able to win 2 in a row.
Yeah, and from what I understand, he hasn't been able to beat the top 10 teams.
Right.
And that's what you look for when you're a program with the pride that Georgia has. They want people that can beat the top 10 teams, and that's how you become number one. That's how you win more national championships, and he hasn't been able to do that. And this is going to be another big test for him, so I think he's going to be a little bit on the hot seat if they don't do really well in this game. I mean, they have to win it, but they need to play really well in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and certainly, the fact that I think it's really interesting. I looked this up just now. This is only the 3rd time since in the last 25 years these have been 2 top 12 teams, which is amazing. You'd think they're always going at it, but
right.
It always seems to go like this with those teams.
It is, and it's kind of interesting because it seems like there is a mental block with Georgia now. I mean, last year,
there was in the 70s and 80s
with Florida, right?
Yeah.
Last year, Georgia should have crushed Florida.
Yeah.
That game was close until the last
Florida
minute.
had a big lead.
Yeah, Florida should have won that game, and Georgia was light years better than that team. And it seems like those are the games. The games that Georgia wins are the ones that Florida really shouldn't have a chance in. The right after Zook got fired, the one where Tebow can barely breathe because his ribs were so banged up from the previous game. Those are the games they're winning. And it just seems like they do not play up to their talent level against Florida, and I don't understand why. It doesn't make any sense because, even when Florida's not that good, they still don't play up to their talent level.
Which was amazing because I lived through the other way for 20 years.
But I think you're exactly right, and that's the reason that to a lot of Georgia fans, Mark Richt will be on the hot seat.
Oh, yeah.
He can't get over this hump.
It's got to drive him nuts.
Yep, absolutely. Well, what a great panel. Neal Anderson and Andy Staples. We really appreciate them coming by. We're going to take a break, come back with the list. All right, it's time for the list, and we always give you 5 things, and this week it's going to be 5 things having to do with Florida-Georgia game, but these are 5 things you may not know about the Florida-Georgia game. Number 1 is, I know you know that its nickname is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, and I know that Bernie Matchett doesn't like that, and they've been trying to get CBS not to use that term, but I still use it because it's what it is. You can't just order it not to be that anymore. It is what it is. But how many of you know that Bill Costells was the guy who gave it the name? Bill Costells and I worked together at one time up in Jacksonville. But where the name came from, you may not know this. He was coming out of the stadium, or going into the stadium, one or the other, and a fan who was already slammed offered a drink to a cop. That's where he came up with the name. So because this fan was so inebriated that he offered a drink to a police officer, he said, this is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, which it is and which it was. Number 2, did you know that we're playing this game on Saturday for the Okefenokee Or? I didn't know this. Apparently this happened in 2009. So the student bodies got together and said, let's come up with a trophy. Now, it's not a trophy like you see with the Paul Bunyan axe or the boot or the spittoon or all these other things for these games where the players run over and grab it and hold it up. This actually is exchanged after the game many days later, but it's an Okefenokee Or. One side's Florida, one side's Georgia. One student body president gets it. Not a big deal, but you may not have known that. Number 3, I'll give you 1.2 million reasons why the game will stay in Jacksonville for a long, long time. I think the contract goes through 2016, but here's one 0.2 million reasons. And that is a difference in what they make from this game. Both schools. You got to understand, if you have a home game for either one of these schools, you're making about $2.2 million. But you don't make anything the next year. So that's $2.2 million for 2 years. With this game, you're making $3.4 million for the 2 years. So that's a difference, obviously, of $1.2 million. So for Florida and Georgia, that's $1 million gain for them. And number 4, I got to tell you a quick story. Did you know that in 1968, well, you don't. Most of you probably weren't even alive. I know you two weren't alive back there. But in 1968, Florida lost 51-0. I sat through the entire game. It rained the entire game. Florida changed offensive and defensive coordinators that week. What a great move that was. But how many of you know that the Georgia players on the sidelines in the fourth quarter of that game were drinking? It's a true story, and I know it's true because Bill Stanfield from Georgia told me that they had the fans sneaking them bourbon and Cokes over the fence because it was a blowout and they didn't have to go back in the game. And I thought that was a great story until I brought it up to somebody and they go, Jake Scott told me the same thing. So, hey, that's 2 sources. We're going with that story. And number 5, on the things you might not know, we always remember Danny Werfel from this game having huge games. You remember the game, obviously, in 1996, just destroyed them. But you may not know this. Shane Matthews actually had way more passing yards than Danny Werfel in the Florida-Georgia rivalry. Shane Matthews only played 3 years of it, obviously, and Danny Werfel had 4. But you got to look at the numbers. 946 yards for Shane Matthews. And again, you got to give Shane a lot of credit. That turned this rivalry around. Those first 3 years, even the '92 season when Florida wasn't very good. They won the East. But 948, for Shane, 730 for Danny. Danny played 4 years. Now again, he got benched in one of them because the ball was wet. You remember that? Terry Dean came in. But that's just a fun fact to know and tell your friends. That's going to do it for this week's show. I want to thank the panel again for coming in. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about the Florida-Georgia game and also look forward to the Missouri game. Until then, this is Pat Dooley, sports columnist of the Gainesville Sun, saying so long from the Sunshine State.